Okay, so you know how we're always tossing our cans and bottles into the recycling bin, feeling pretty good about ourselves, but have you ever actually stopped to think about just how much waste these industries create? I mean, we're talking about a massive amount of metal and glass.
Yeah.
And that's what we're diving into today with GreenFlow Environmental
Yeah.
Solutions. They're all about sustainable waste management, but specifically for the canning and bottling industries.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, what goes on in these factories is way more complicated and honestly way more interesting than it seems. So in this deep dive, we're going to try to uncover the hidden challenges of all this waste. But more importantly, we're going to figure out why you should care, even if you've never even seen a factory floor up close. One of the things I noticed right away on GreenFlow's website is how much they talk about these tailored waste solutions. They really emphasize that this isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of industry. So what makes this waste so different?
Well, it's interesting because it's not just about the cans and bottles themselves. We're really talking about a whole web of waste that comes from making food and drinks.
Huh.
So you've got organic byproducts like fruit pulp left over from making juice, the used grain from breweries, even mountains of coffee grounds. And all that stuff decomposes fast, which doesn't sound so bad. But when you have industrial amounts of it, you're talking about some major stink and pest problems if it's not handled right. Then you've got the liquid waste, which is all the wastewater from cleaning and rinsing everything. And that can have all sorts of stuff in it, like little bits of ingredients or cleaning products, depending on what the facility's making.
Oh, right.
And we can't forget about the oils they use in all the machinery.
Yeah.
That requires a whole different disposal method.
Yeah, it's like our kitchens just exploded into giant factories.
Exactly.
We compost our scraps at home, but imagine that multiplied by like 1,000. What I find really cool is how GreenFlow takes on all these different kinds of waste with their unique approach. Can you give us an example of how a solution might be different for, say, a bottling plant versus a place that cans food?
Absolutely. So picture a bottling plant. They're mainly dealing with liquid waste, right?
Yeah.
So their solution might be to make their wastewater treatment process as good as it can be.
Yeah.
They might even be able to reuse that treated water somewhere else in the plant.
Oh, that's smart.
Now, think about a factory that cans fruit. They've got tons of organic byproducts.
Right.
Their plan might involve setting up a composting system right there on site, maybe partnering with local farms to do some large-scale composting, or even something called anaerobic digestion to make biogas.
Anaerobic what now? That sounds kind of intense. Tell me more.
It's really neat, actually. Basically, you use microorganisms to break down the organic matter without any oxygen.
Huh.
And that process creates biogas, which can be used as fuel and digestate, which makes really good fertilizer. So you're taking waste and turning it into something useful again.
That's incredible. Like turning trash into treasure.
Yeah.
It's clear that GreenFlow doesn't just have some generic solution. They really get to know each facility and its challenges. Their website also mentions a big focus on sustainable disposal. I'm guessing that means way more than just sending everything to the dump.
You got it. GreenFlow is really serious about keeping as much waste as possible out of landfills.
I love that.
Remember those organic byproducts we talk about? Well, they might partner with farms to compost those or use that anaerobic digestion, turning that waste into valuable fertilizer or biogas.
It's like giving that waste a second life instead of just burying it.
Exactly.
So we've got composting, anaerobic digestion. What other tools do they have for things like that liquid waste?
Well, that can get pretty interesting. Wastewater often needs a bunch of different treatments. GreenFlow might use something called dissolved air flotation, which basically removes solids by bringing them to the surface with tiny air bubbles. They might also use a special type of filtration called membrane filtration to get rid of even tinier particles and impurities.
Membrane filtration. Sounds very high-tech, almost like a surgery for dirty water. Speaking of high-tech, I know GreenFlow is also big on something they call organic waste recycling. I love that they're not just getting rid of stuff, but trying to give it a new purpose. Yeah. What are some of the more surprising things these bioproducts can be turned into?
You'd be amazed at the possibilities. Take fruit peels and pulp, for example. Instead of ending up in landfills, they can be used for animal feed or even made into bioplastics.
Wow.
And remember those spent grains from breweries. Those can be used in things like bread or even to grow mushrooms.
That's so cool. It's amazing to think about all this hidden potential in what we usually call trash. And I bet this kind of thinking is not just good for the planet, but also good for business.
Absolutely. It's about moving away from that old take, make, dispose system and embracing a circular economy where waste is seen as a valuable resource. That's a win for businesses and for the environment.
Definitely a win-win. Now, while we're talking about wins, I know GreenFlow also talks about compliance as a big benefit they offer. Can you tell us a bit about that? Why is it so important in this industry, and how does GreenFlow make sure their clients are always following the rules?
Compliance is absolutely crucial in the canning and bottling world because honestly, there's a lot on the line. We're talking about industries that, if they aren't careful, can have a huge impact on our environment.
That's true.
There are strict rules about how these companies have to handle and dispose of their waste, and keeping up with those regulations can be tricky. That's where GreenFlow really shines.
So they're like a guide helping these companies through this maze of rules and regulations.
Exactly.
What does that look like in practice?
Think of it like a two-pronged approach.
Okay.
First, GreenFlow helps their clients get all the permits and do all the reports required,
Okay.
which can be a lot in this industry. But it goes further than just checking boxes. GreenFlow helps their clients establish best practices that actually go above and beyond just the bare minimum requirements.
So it's not just about avoiding fines, it's about building a culture of responsibility and environmental care, which is something we can all get behind right now. I'm really curious about how GreenFlow actually implements all these solutions. On their website, they lay out a 4-step process, and it's impressively thorough. It starts with a waste assessment, which seems pretty self-explanatory.
Right.
But can you walk us through what's involved in this first step and why it's so important?
Sure. It might sound simple at first, but this initial waste assessment is really the foundation for everything else.
Okay.
It's like when a doctor gives you a full checkup before deciding on any treatment plan.
Yeah, so they're not just jumping in with solutions. They're taking the time to understand the situation.
Right.
What are they actually looking for during this assessment?
They're looking at everything. The types and amounts of waste being generated, how they're currently getting rid of it, the layout of the facility, even areas where they could improve. They're essentially building a detailed picture of the company's waste management system, finding inefficiencies, potential environmental risks, and of course, opportunities.
Like a deep dive audit of their waste.
Exactly.
And once they've got this complete understanding, that's when they move on to creating the custom waste plan, right?
That's right. And this is where those tailored solutions we talked about come in.
Right.
They take all the information they gathered and use it to develop a plan specifically designed to meet the needs and challenges of that facility.
And I'm guessing those plans can look totally different depending on what kind of waste a company is producing. We touched on this earlier, but could you give us an example of how a plan might differ for, say, a company making drinks versus one that cans fruits?
Absolutely. Let's go back to that bottling plant. Their plan might be really focused on getting the most out of their wastewater treatment.
Okay.
We're talking about tweaking all those different stages of treatment, like that dissolved air flotation and membrane filtration stuff, so that it's super efficient and they're meeting all those regulations, maybe even exceeding them.
Nice.
But there's something else to think about too. GreenFlow might see if they can reuse that treated water somewhere else in the plant.
Oh, interesting.
Like maybe they could use it for irrigation or cleaning, or even put it back into part of the production process. It's about closing the loop wherever they can.
Turning a problem into a solution. I like it. And for a company that cans fruit, that custom plan would probably look totally different, right?
You got it. If you're dealing with a mountain of organic byproducts, your strategy might be to set up a really efficient composting system right there at the facility.
Okay.
GreenFlow could help them figure out the best composting methods for their particular byproducts. There's in-vessel composting, vermicomposting, which uses worms.
Worms are amazing.
They are.
What if a facility doesn't have the space for on-site composting, though?
That's when they team up with someone else. GreenFlow might connect them with local farms that could use those byproducts for large-scale composting.
Makes sense.
It's a win-win because the farms get free fertilizer and it keeps all that stuff out of the landfill. Plus, GreenFlow would help them figure out the logistics, like how to transport everything safely and efficiently.
It's like they're playing matchmaker, connecting different industries and helping them use each other's waste.
Exactly.
And sometimes that matchmaking involves some pretty high-tech solutions. Like I know GreenFlow is really into eco-friendly waste processing. What are some of the cool technologies or methods they use to actually process all this waste?
Ooh, this is where it gets really interesting. GreenFlow is always checking out the latest and greatest in waste management.
Cool.
We talked about anaerobic digestion, which is a perfect example of using biology to turn organic waste into something useful like biogas and digestate.
And that biogas can be used for what exactly?
It's a fuel source. They can power their facilities with it, which means using less fossil fuels, or they can even feed it into the natural gas grid. It's a win for the company and a win for the environment.
No, that's what I call turning trash into treasure,
Yeah.
turning waste into actual energy. What other technological magic are they using?
Well, for wastewater treatment, they're using some really advanced filtration systems.
Yeah.
These systems use things like reverse osmosis and ultrafiltration to get rid of even the tiniest contaminants. And what you're left with is super clean water that they can reuse or safely release back into the environment. And remember how we talked about those waste oils being a challenge?
Mm-hmm.
Well, GreenFlow is a leader in finding new and innovative solutions for that tricky waste stream. Yeah, they might use something called bioremediation, which uses microorganisms to break those oils down into less harmful substances.
Yeah.
Or they might use special equipment to separate the oil from everything else so it can be disposed of safely or even recycled.
Bioremediation, specialized it's like something out of a science fiction movie. It really shows you how much innovation is happening behind the scenes to tackle these waste problems.
Absolutely.
We've covered a lot of ground here, from waste assessments and fancy plans to high-tech processing. But there's one more piece of the puzzle we haven't talked about: compliance documentation. And I have to admit, when I first saw that on their website, I thought, oh, paperwork. But then it hit me, this isn't just about filling out forms, it's about being accountable, being transparent, and showing that they're serious about sustainability.
Exactly.
Am I right?
You are. Compliance documentation is key to a responsible and sustainable waste management system.
Okay.
It's not just a box to check off. It's about making sure every single step of the process is documented and tracked.
So it's about keeping really good records.
Yes. And there are a few important reasons why they do that.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more about this why behind all the paperwork.
First, it creates that transparency and accountability you were talking about.
Okay.
Companies can prove to regulators, to stakeholders, even to their own customers, that they're handling their waste responsibly and following all the rules.
So it's like a paper trail to prove they're doing everything by the book. What else?
It's also really useful for tracking progress. By keeping such detailed records of their waste management, companies can see where they can improve, see how effective their efforts are, and demonstrate how their actions are benefiting the environment.
I see.
They can actually put numbers to it. How much waste are they keeping out of landfills? How much water are they saving? How much energy are they conserving? It's all right there in the data.
So it's not just about following the rules, it's about always trying to do better. It's about using information to get better and more sustainable over time.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the bigger picture. We've talked about how GreenFlow does what it does, but let's talk about why. Why should our listeners, even those who think they only deal with canning and bottling waste when they recycle, care about this issue?
That's such an important question. It's easy to forget about these industries, to think they don't really affect our daily lives.
Right.
But the truth is, the canning and bottling industries are a huge part of our global food and beverage system.
True.
And as more and more people want packaged foods and drinks, these industries are producing more and more waste.
Which isn't sustainable.
Exactly. And that's where things can get a little messy if we're not careful.
So you're saying that our choices as consumers, the things we buy, the brands we support, they all have a ripple effect that goes way beyond our own homes?
Precisely. Every time we grab a can of soup or a bottle of juice, we're connected to this whole system of production, packaging, and waste. And if that waste isn't handled responsibly well, there could be some big consequences.
Okay, so let's talk about those consequences. What happens if these industries don't make sustainability a priority? What if we just keep doing things the way we always have?
One of the most immediate problems is water pollution. If wastewater from these factories isn't treated properly, it can contaminate our rivers, lakes, even the water underground. And that affects ecosystems and our own health too.
And it's not just about the water itself, right? What about those little bits of ingredients and cleaning agents you mentioned?
Exactly. Depending on what a factory is producing, that wastewater could have all sorts of stuff in it. And some of those things can be harmful even in small amounts. We're talking about things like salts, sugars, detergents, even traces of heavy metals sometimes.
It's scary to think that pollution isn't always visible. It can be hiding where we can't even see it.
That's right. And water pollution isn't the only problem. Sometimes if they don't burn their waste properly, it can pollute the air too.
Oh, right.
That releases harmful particles and greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And then there's the problem of landfills. We're running out of space to bury all our trash.
It's like all these environmental problems are coming together, and it all comes back to how much we love packaged food and drinks. It feels kind of overwhelming, to be honest. But that's where companies like GreenFlow step in, right? They're like a ray of hope in this kind of depressing situation.
They really are. What's so inspiring about GreenFlow is that they're not just trying to reduce the negative impact. They're trying to completely change the way we think about this.
Yeah.
They're showing everyone that these industries can be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
And I'm guessing that kind of change doesn't happen overnight, does it?
It's definitely a process. It takes commitment, collaboration, and a willingness to try new things.
For sure.
And it's a process that we all need to be part of.
So where do we fit in as consumers? What can we do to support a more sustainable future for these industries?
It all starts with awareness.
Yeah.
When we understand how complicated this waste issue really is, we can make better choices as shoppers.
Right.
Look for brands that are trying to use sustainable packaging and responsible waste management. Support companies that are looking for innovative solutions. And don't be afraid to ask questions.
Ask questions, demand transparency, make it clear that sustainability is important to us.
Absolutely. It's about sending a message that we want our food and drinks, but we want a healthy planet too. And that's something worth working towards.
Well said. And on that note, let's leave our listeners with something to think about. Next time you crack open a can of soda or use some pasta sauce, think about the journey that product took to get to you. Think about all the resources it took to make it, all the waste that was generated, and the impact all those choices have on our environment. But most importantly, think about the power you have as a consumer. Your choices, your actions can shape the future of these industries and encourage them to be more sustainable and responsible. That's a pretty powerful thought, don't you think? And that's a wrap on today's deep dive into the world of canning and bottling waste and the incredible work GreenFlow is doing to make it more sustainable.